Your body has two different fences that are influencing or dictating how mobile you are. And on this week's episode of the Exercises Health Podcast, we want to explain to you what those fences are and why knowing that is important. We're going to cue our introduction and dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercises Health Podcast, brought to you by Muscle Activation Schaumburg. We're your hosts, Charlie
and Julie.
And today we are discussing this idea of the two different fences that your body has, all of our bodies have, within us, that highly influence our mobility. How mobile our joints are, how well our body can move, are dictated by these two fences. We want to let you know if you want to start taking action on what we're talking about today. That's exactly what we can help you with at our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, where we specialize in muscle activation techniques. So all you need to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to our website, www.matschaumburg.com, click the big green button that says Get Started, and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. All right, so this idea of two fences, this was originally taught to us by one of our mentors, Tom Purvis, in the Resistance Training Specialist Program. And how Tom goes about describing this really, I think, paints a very clear and easy to understand picture of why our bodies may move in the ways that they do, why some people that we see are able to move well in one direction, but maybe not so well in the other direction, and that may be different from how well we are able to move. And no matter how hard you try, it can be really hard to change these things, or sometimes it can be a little bit easier to change these things. And so we want to teach you about these metaphorical fences today. So as you approach your workouts, as you approach any kind of mobility work that you're doing, you can have these concepts in mind, and you can make sure that you're going about trying to influence your body to move better in a safe way for your body.
You're right, Charlie. And really knowing or trying to explore these differences within your own body is really going to help you increase the health and mobility and wellness of your body, because you're going to be able to figure out, like, okay, where is in my body do I need to be putting more input so that things are changing, and where in my body am I just understanding, like, hey, that might be, how my body's structured. I think a lot of times when we think about mobility, we think that everything that, someone else could do is possible in our own bodies. And then we might feel like, oh my gosh, I'm just so not flexible. And that might not be the case. You might actually be really flexible relative to your own structure. And on the flip side of it, I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, I'm going to stop working on something because I'm blaming like a permanent thing in my body, but really it's not that permanent, and it's something that you really can change. So I hope that after today's conversation, and we're going to explore these two types of fences, we're calling them, or the analogy is that we have two styles of fences in our body. But I hope that after this conversation, you're able to feel like, okay, let's start exploring more things with our body, seeing where I can change, my body, and seeing where, maybe my body is just, that's just the structure of my body at this time.
Exactly. So, all right. So what are these two types of fences? The first, if you imagine a house, and around the house is a giant stone fence that's like all the way lining the entire house. Okay. It's like, hey, if you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. But this fence is not movable. All right. It's not like, oh, it's there today, gone tomorrow, whatever, unless it gets blasted through. Like, that fence is, for the sake of this analogy, going to be permanent. Like, it gets put up and it's going to be there, and it's, keeping stuff out that needs to stay out, it's keeping stuff in that needs to stay in, because it's permanent, it's tall, like, you're not getting through it, okay? Then there's another type of fence, and, on the road that runs in front of this home is a pothole. And the city decides they're going to go fill the pothole. In order to keep traffic off of that pothole, they put up one of those kind of orange plastic fences that, is around that pothole, because that fence is temporary. All right. It's not going to be there forever. Once the pothole gets filled in, it will be able to be removed, and it's no problem, because now all of a sudden, the road, you can drive on it, you're not going to wreck your car. And, again, that fence that was there is temporary. So we have permanent fence and we have a temporary fence. And within our bodies, we have the exact same scenario going on where we have these permanent fences and we have these temporary fences. And the permanent fences are saying, no, you are not going to move there, no matter what. This is how, we are keeping your range of motion here, and we're not going to allow you to move farther than where this permanent fence is. And the temporary fence says, for the time being, we're not going to allow you to move here. But, on another date, at another time, we may allow that because we're going to remove this temporary fence. So these two things exist within our body, permanent fences and temporary fences. It is important to understand both as it pertains to your training and trying to improve your mobility.
That's right. So when you think about a fence, that's basically like a limit, right? It's like when you think about the permanent fence around a house, that's like the limit where you can walk before you run into a permanent fence that you're not moving, right? And on the road, it's like a limit where you're going to avoid maybe temporarily because it is removable, but only when the circumstances are right. So how does this really translate to our body? So when you think about a permanent fence or a permanent limit, that is referring to the structure of our joints. So every single joint in your body has a structure, and that structure dictates its function, or in another language, it dictates how it's going to move. A really easy way to think about this is think about different styles of hinges. Think about if you walked up to a door, you can pretty much assume how that door is going to move, right? It's going to swing back and forth, and you could just grab the door handle and really easily find out how it moves. That means you're also finding out how it's structured, right? A joint has that. So if you were to move a joint, it would have a way or a style that it would move. Or if you walked up to a different style of hinge, let's say, this is coming to my head because there's a whole bunch of fairs happening or carnivals. Have you ever seen those one of those swinging ships, right? So the joint or the hinge is now oriented differently to allow that ship to go in a certain motion, right? And so the way it moves is determined by its structure. Those structural things are permanent fences. They're permanent fixtures. They are permanent limits in your body. And we don't want to violate those because then you will be, harassing your joint or doing negative harm potentially to your joint. Just like if you walked up to a door and, my kids, they want to hang on a door, and what that's not good for is not good for their hinges, right? Because it's going to put a lot of wear and tear on the joints of the door in a way that it's not supposed to move. It's supposed to move in an open and closed fashion, not hanging, pulling it down to the ground fashion, right? So when we think about permanent structures in our body, permanent fences, permanent limits in our body, we're thinking about the structure of our joints. Now, I see this a lot, especially when it comes to people comparing their flexibility. So one of the areas that you'll see this a lot in, especially if you work with someone's body or whatever, is the hip joint. This is a really good example. So the hip joint is like a ball and a socket. And so you think well, everyone has a ball and a socket, so why doesn't everyone's hips move the same? Well, because there are characteristics of this ball and socket that then change the structure, aka the permanent fencing around your hip of how the hip's going to move. So some people have a really shallow socket, right? And so you could imagine if you had a really shallow socket, you're going to have a lot more mobility of that hip joint relative to someone with maybe a more deep socket, right? Where there's less motion available. And some people's socket angled to the front. So it's like a headlight to the front or the side or down. And so everyone has, although if we looked at a human skeleton, we'd say, oh yeah, that's the ball and socket. That should be the hip joint. Everyone has enough variation in this ball and socket characteristics, in this permanent fencing around your hip, that you are going to notice very different changes in mobility and flexibility and range of motion through the hip. And it's not because you're doing anything wrong, or it's not because you haven't done the right exercises or you haven't done the right yoga class or the stretches. The big thing that determines what's going on with the permanent fencing in your hip is literally the bones, right? The joint, the structure of that joint. And those are things that we should never expect to change. And so that's going to be the biggest thing that determines your permanent fencing is the structure of your body, and that will allow you to know or allow your bones to move, but it's going to be determined by something that is relatively unchangeable, which is the structure of your joints and your bones.
Exactly. Now, the temporary fence in our bodies is the neuromuscular system, how the muscles and the nervous system are interacting to allow our joints and our bones to move. And so there are times when your nervous system will intentionally tighten up muscles in order to limit how mobile you are. And there are times, if that happens for a long enough period of time, where your body's default may be to just have things a little bit more tight because that's what your body has learned to do. And so to take it back to the analogy of the temporary fence, yeah, there are times when, there's road construction going on and, those fences need to be put up so you don't drive over, the parts of the road that are under construction. And then there are also times where our body, like, metaphorically forgets to take down those fences because it's just so used to, driving around them, that every time, we do a certain motion or whatever, our bodies just naturally tighten up because that's what it is used to doing, even if there isn't necessarily something wrong, there isn't necessarily an issue, that's just what our body has learned. And so in those scenarios, we want to be able to not only influence our nervous system, but also explore why our nervous system may be putting up these temporary fences in terms of kind of limiting our mobility or tightening things up. Is it something that there's actually an issue that needs to be addressed, or is it something that, our body has just learned over time and, that's as much motion as it wants to give us because, that is easier for it at this time as opposed to consistently trying to relearn, how much motion is appropriate for us. And so with that whole exploration, we can really see, okay, is our mobility limited due to, again, a temporary fence, or is it limited because of a more permanent fence like our bony structure? Is it limited because there's an actual issue going on within our neuromuscular system, or is it limited because our neuromuscular system, for the most part, is operating pretty well, but, our body has just learned, like, this is as much motion as we've felt safe with in the past, so this is all we are going to give you right now. And so that kind of exploration really helps to not only make sure that we are staying safe with the exercise and the activities that we're doing, but can really help us get rapid improvement because we're actually addressing the things that need to be addressed.
So usually when you're thinking about, okay, well, is it important that I know which fences or limits in my range of motion are permanent and which are, these temporary ones? So we talk to a lot of people, and I'm not saying this is like the blanket statement for everyone, but I do commonly hear, if you ever notice someone that has like some limited range of motion but they feel good all the time. Like I have this client and he's like, the more that I, try to smash my range of motion and stretch here, I know I'm limited compared to my friends, but like I feel really good. And the more that I try to like, work on this thing, the less good I feel. Like I wake up, I feel like sore and achy and all these things. He probably has some different permanent fencing relative to his friends, or he might have some unique stuff going on. That is fine. And so what's interesting is like, just because you have limited motion, it doesn't mean, and usually it's limited relative to things you're seeing outside of yourself, like you went to a yoga class or your golfing buddies or whatever, but you feel fine with it, right? You feel pretty darn good. And then the people with a lot of the temporary fences, they often are feeling the symptoms of that neuromuscular change. It's like their neuromuscular system is on guard, putting up all these fences, like blockades, like we have to stop here, we have to stop here, we have to stop here. And what's really cool is that when those people start addressing it, especially with something like MAT, which directly addresses neuromuscular issues like that, is that they start feeling a lot of relief. It's like, wow, like I feel like I just have so much more motion. And that might mean they actually do have a lot more motion, or it might mean they have 2 more degrees of motion. But it means that that fence came down. Like there was not a reason for a fence to be there, but your body put it there. Because usually what feels pretty good in people's body, really good in people's body really, is when your full structural range of motion is very similar to the range of motion that you can access with your muscles. What doesn't feel good is when you have a whole bunch of range of motion in your joint, but your body only lets you move half of that, right? So let's say, just for numbers' sake, just to give you a good example, let's say you have 180 degrees of motion in your hip, and your hip only lets you move 90 degrees because you have all these fences blocking your hip. That usually feels tight, achy, and not that good. And it feels weak, usually like unstable, like we're clenching down. But if you're able to expand your range of motion so that it gets closer and closer and closer to that 180, because your structure has 180, that's what starts feeling really good, free, strong, more stable. But your 180 might be 150. Your 180 might be 100 degrees, right? It's different for everyone. So what's really feels good, feels strong and healthy to a lot of people is not the total amount of range of motion. It's not the I can touch my toes range of motion. It's more of your structure and your ability to use that structure is very similar.
Exactly. So how do we go about closing this gap? How do we go about, closing the gap between how much motion your structure will allow you to have versus how much motion your neuromuscular system is allowing you to have? The thing that we have found to be most effective with this, hands down, is muscle activation techniques. Reason being is because it is directly looking at where you're having those temporary fences put up by your neuromuscular system, saying, oh, don't move here because, there are some issues with the communication between your brain and your muscles. Oh, don't move here because there's some issues with how well your muscles are contracting. Oh, don't move here. And so by identifying those areas in your body where those temporary fences are, we're able to address what, in our opinion, is really the primary cause for those temporary fences of a breakdown in communication between the brain and the muscles. We're able to improve that communication of how well your brain and muscles are talking with each other. And as a result, those temporary fences get taken down. And then you're able to access a lot more of the motion that your structure will allow you to have, that, the permanent fence will allow you to have. And so with muscle activation techniques, again, that is the primary thing that we are looking at. Where is that breakdown in communication between the brain and the muscles? By restoring that, we see that a lot of these symptoms that come along with these temporary fences, whether it is muscle tightness, like you were saying, Julie, or, pain signals, pain in the joint, pain in the muscles, things like, the fascia feels tight, or whatever it is that, we think we are perceiving, it's really just our nervous system putting up these temporary fences. Where those things are able to be addressed by improving the communication between the brain and the muscles with muscle activation techniques, and then those temporary fences have the opportunity to get taken down. So if you're hearing this and you would like to experience muscle activation techniques for yourself, that's exactly what we can help you with at our studio, Muscle Activation in Schaumburg, where we specialize in muscle activation techniques. All you need to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to our website, www.matschaumburg.com, click the big green button that says Get Started, and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. So remember, there are two different metaphorical fences within your body. You have the permanent fence, which is your bony structure, and then you have these temporary fences, which are strategically placed by your neuromuscular system to limit your motion for one reason or another. The permanent structure, that's not something that you want to go about trying to change. But the temporary fences that are put up by your neuromuscular system, those are absolutely changeable. And the thing that we have found to be most effective to make those changes is muscle activation techniques. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We always appreciate your attention, whether it's your ears on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or your eyes on YouTube. Wherever you consume our content, if you wouldn't mind leaving us a rating review, it always means the world to us when you do. We are wishing you a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.